Outside, an owl shrieked. I became aware of the smell rising up off our suit, linen, sweat, barley.
I had not thought to come here again.
Thus thought Mr. Lincoln.
Yet here I am. One last look.
And dropped into a country squat before the sick box.
His little face, again, little hands. Here they are, ever will be, just so. No smile, ever again. The mouth a tight line. He does not look like he is sleeping. He was an open-mouthed sleeper, and many expressions would play across his face as he dreamed, and he would sometimes mumble a few silly words. If there ever really was a Lazarus, there should be nothing preventing the conditions that pertained at that time to pertain here and now.
Then it was quite something. Mr. Lincoln tried to get the sick form to rise by making his mind quiet and then opening it up to whatever might exist that he did not know about, that might be able to make the sick form rise, feeling foolish, not truly believing such a thing was even...
Still, it is a vast world, and anything might happen.
He stared down at the sick form, at one finger up on one hand, waiting for the slightest...
Please, please, please.
But no.
That is superstition. Will not do.
Well, that is an extract from the novel Lincoln in the Bardo, written by George Saunders, which won the Booker Prize in 2017. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book In, which is a podcast where we explore and discuss great literature. And this particular one today is the last in a series of 4 about recent winners of the Booker Prize. And the extract we've just read, we shared the reading room because it shuttles the extract from the narrative of one of the ghosts, in this case, Volman, to the thoughts of the president, Abraham Lincoln, in the year 1862. I say one of the ghosts because the novel is voiced, for the most part, by the ghosts of the local cemetery. And Lincoln's son, Willie, has just died at the age of 11. And in his grief, Lincoln has come to the cemetery to try and find some sort of connection with Willie by holding his dead body. The novel's set in 1862, just before the turning point of the US Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln faced not only this personal trauma, but also a time of national crisis. And this novel explores how his grief may have moved him to identify with the suffering and grief of his country, and perhaps move him forwards with greater determination to win the war for the cause of the abolition of slavery. And as, you know, the idiosyncrasies of the extract we've just read make apparent, the novel has an unusual and at times, to be honest, bizarre narrative style. It's got a polyphonic structure, which means a multitude of voices. Does this work? Does the strangeness of the style of the novel, does it equate to originality, or does it ultimately distract from the novel's purpose? Is the novel successful at pointing us towards perhaps the most decisive moment in all of US history? These, Rue, are weighty questions. Who better than you to answer?
Well, thank you, Charlie. It's a completely unique book. I can certainly say that for it. Polyphonic is not wrong. Someone has worked out 166 different voices telling this story, and it creates, when you first read it, you really no idea what's going on at all. But as you say, it deals with the grief of Abraham Lincoln at the death of his son, the effects that may have had on American history, on the Civil War. And it deals actually also in what you might say are even more important issues than that. It deals with life and death, the nature of death, and what may or may not happen when you die, what goes on in your mind before you die. And we're going to be looking at all those things and have a look at how George Saunders deals with those issues and the way in which this book approaches them. So let's have a look quickly at George Saunders himself first. He's nearly as old as we are, Charlie. He's 58 years old. So he's been around quite a while. And this was his first major novel. He'd written quite a lot of novellas and quite a lot of other academic stuff that we'll come on to. He was born in Texas and he grew up in Chicago, so he has spoken of the sense of those two places and the family that he has in both, really grounding him fully in the US. So he's not, in the sense many US writers are immigrants, and I don't think you get so much of that with him. I think he has a connection back to the roots of American history. He very, very bright. He was a scientist at school, and he got a degree in geophysical engineering from the Colorado School of Mines. And that was his profession for 15 years. His career was in the oil industry, in environmental engineering. But in the early 80s, in his sort of late 20s, I guess, he took a creative writing course at Syracuse in New York. On which, amongst other things, he met and married his wife in the space of 3 weeks, which he says is a Syracuse record that still stands to this day. And he was a kind of sort of cool guy. There's lots of photos of him at this time. He looks like, do you remember the rock band Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Charlie? I mean, you might be too young for that.
And without having an image in my mind, I can guess what they would have looked like.
Yeah, so this is George Saunders, think Stephen Stills or David Crosby, slightly balding, blonde hair, moustache, and so on. Anyway, he started writing short stories around that time, and he got one or two of them got published. They won some awards. And in 1996, he published his first collection of short stories, which was called Civil War in Bad Decline. I think you might have read that, Charlie. Have you, or know about it?
Yeah, I'm familiar with his stories. His characters are losers, weirdos, stooges that work in theme parks, antisocial kids, convicted murderers. And in his short fiction, his characters yearn for something better, daydreaming so aggressively that those dreams spill onto the page. They kind of hijack the narrative. And his canvas, it's kind of a sad, destitute America where providing for one's family and maintaining one's dignity are mutually exclusive. So whilst very different from Lincoln in the Bardo, there's a sort of, I think, a sense of, the losers and weirdos also appearing here.
Yeah, and we meet quite a few of them in the cemetery, don't we, in this book? You're right. I mean, he certainly has a social conscience. He did a lot of journalism for the New York Times. He was sent off, amongst other things, to cover the 2016 Trump campaign, and wrote, I think, very well about that. He wrote some quite celebrated pieces, but he was not a fan of Donald Trump. And is not to this day. And short stories have been the bulk of his career. He's published several further collections over the last 20 years. He's won many awards. He sees the short story as a complete art form in itself. He has become a professor of creative writing at Syracuse, and one of his classes is specifically one that covers Russian short stories, and he sees the Russian 19th century short story writers as being the masters of this art. And in 2021 he published a book called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, and in that he publishes a number of short stories, I think there's 7 of them, by Tolstoy, Gogol, Turgenev and Chekhov in full. And then he writes a sort of short essay on how they're constructed and what he thinks they are about. And I read it. It's a wonderful book. It's a masterclass in getting inside the mind of a writer. I've got a friend actually who is writing a novel herself, and it's been a long-term project. She's been doing it for about 15 years, I think.
Right.
Anyway,
Sounds like me.
she told me to read this book, and this is what she's basing the whole thing on, I think. So Lincoln in the Bardo was published in 2017, so 8 years ago. He would have just been about 50. Very successful, won multiple awards, including the Booker Prize. And he hasn't published much. He hasn't published another novel since, although I think he is about to finish a second one.
The background to this novel is very much, the Civil War and clearly Abraham Lincoln. But before, relative to that, you a moment ago mentioned the Orange Man. I think we've been through towards 20 episodes now without a mention. Do you think there's a sense in which, you've read some of his articles or you've read some of his nonfiction, he's comparing different leaders here? Abraham Lincoln, a different kind of man, perhaps even reclaiming something for the left?
Possibly. I'm not sure it's quite that crude. I think he's, he admires Lincoln hugely. That is clear. And he's presenting him in this book as a very sympathetic figure, both deeply human, beset by this appalling tragedy of his son dying, but also a man of destiny who is able to run the war effort, inspire a nation in a terrible civil war and lead them to victory and ultimately to the abolition of slavery. I think, as you said earlier, Charlie, this book is set in February 1862. That's when Willie Lincoln died. And the Civil War at this point is less than a year old. So the outcome is uncertain. There's still 3 years to go. Lincoln has taken sole command of the Union war effort. He's under enormous pressure. But in terms of slavery, clearly one of the key issues, we're still 10 months away from the Emancipation Proclamation,
Right.
which was January the 1st, 1863, which declared that slaves in rebel states were free, which was about 90% of them. And slavery was actually abolished by the 13th Amendment in 1865. So it was all ahead of them,
Right.
all this stuff. And in the course of the coming 3 years after this book is set, a further 700,000 soldiers will die, possibly a further 300,000 civilians. God knows how many more were injured and traumatized.
Yeah.
So it's a pivotal point in American history.
And when you say that, from my knowledge of US history, what we're talking about is quite literally the future of the United States being decided. And there's a point in this novel where Lincoln thinks if it went off the rails, meaning the country, so went the whole kit forever. So Lincoln voices the idea that if we don't get it right now, this is the end of the Union.
Exactly. So it's a moment of great crisis in all sorts of ways. Briefly about his family life, Lincoln's family life. They had 4 children in total. There was a son, Robert, born a long time before this, 1843. So by the time of this story, he's already grown up. He doesn't
There was
feature.
a second boy who died, I think. Is that right? Not just Willie in this story?
Yes, exactly. So they'd already experienced the grief of losing a child. And then at this time, they had 2 boys, surviving boys, younger boys, Willie, who is 11, and his younger brother, Tad, who's 8. And all the accounts are that they adored children. And by the standards of the time, they were very lenient parents. There are accounts of Willie and Tad causing chaos in the libraries of the bookcases of the White House, throwing books all over the place, throwing ink, generally causing merry hell. And their father was very tolerant. And the father-son bond was very strong. There's a lovely letter that Willie wrote home to a friend after he'd been on a trip with his father to Chicago when he was 8 or 9 years old. And he says the following in this letter. This is Willie to his friend. This town is a very beautiful place. Me and father went to 2 theatres the other night. Me and father have a nice little room to ourselves. We have 2 little pictures on a washstand. The smallest one for me, the largest one for father. We have 2 little towels on top of both pictures. The smallest one for me, the largest one for father. I think it's so sweet and touching that, isn't it? A very sort of intimate sense of what their relationship was like.
And both Willie and Tad had been ill, is that right? In
well, they got ill. together. And at the time it was known as bilious fever. It was probably typhoid and probably caused by contaminated water systems at the White House. But after a few days, Tad began to recover, but Willie gradually weakened. And obviously the parents were very worried. They spent lots of time at his bedside. And as it happens, the Lincolns had organised a big party on the night of the 20th of February, 1862. They'd organised a big party at the White House. They were obviously very worried about Willie, who was not at all well, but the doctor had told them that he was getting better, so they went ahead with the party. But during the night, his condition worsened and he died.
And both parents crushed, or deeply affected by the death.
They were, not surprisingly. Lincoln, so the way Lincoln responded is the subject of this book.
Mm.
The way his wife responded was that she basically she seemed to have some sort of breakdown and really couldn't operate for quite a few weeks. She was unable to go to his funeral and people were worried about her sanity. The body was embalmed, and after Willie had lain in state in the green room in the White House, was interred at Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C.
And one of the voices in the novel, this is one of the source voices, we'll explain that in a bit, says, when a child is lost, there is no end to the self-torment a parent may inflict. Doubt will fester as long as we live. And, that the loss of a child, perhaps to a death that, may have been seen. Certainly some of the sources say it was avoidable. Can there be anything more heartbreaking? And I think that was because initially when I first, we'll get to the novel, we don't want to jump ahead, but, to begin with, it's very confusing. But I think the thing that initially pulled me in was the pathos, the very strong sense of just the grief and pain that Lincoln felt.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did this all become a novel? Well, George Saunders first heard of this story, the story of Lincoln going to the cemetery and getting his son's body out of the coffin and holding it. He first heard the story 20 years before he wrote the book, 25 years before he wrote the book in the early 1990s. And it struck him as a curious and affecting story. And he did try to write it up in some way, but it didn't really work for him. He felt it was too intense. It was too worthy. He couldn't really sort of make anything of it. But separately, he was also playing with the idea of a novel set in a graveyard with the ghosts as characters, possibly a series of monologues. And that in his mind, that could be a mix of, these ghostly characters and real characters. He wasn't quite sure how they were going to interact. And then he had the idea of linking the two stories together. And he started reading as much as he could of contemporary accounts of Lincoln's life, and particularly this period. So accounts of the party that they held, accounts of the way Lincoln reacted after the death, the way people saw him in physical terms and as a leader. And he got all these contemporary accounts and he sort of cut them out and cut out the extracts and put them on the floor and sort of move them around like a jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
And it became a bit of an obsession with him. But the whole book was 20 years in the making.
It reminds me, what you described there, of two of the books we've done recently. So Hilary Mantel, I think, had just a lot of extracts, which she had, on her desk and in her room, and was sort of moving them around to get historical accuracy. But what you described there about the kind of the ghost plot and the real plot, that also describes me as Seven Moons in the way that also was built up over time. To kind of combine a ghost story and a sort of political reality. So, Ru, are you going to talk us through the structure, the plot, something like that?
Well, I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
So, okay, as we said, this book is set in Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown, Washington, in February 1862, on the night that Lincoln comes to the cemetery to see his son's body. And the action, if you can call it the action, takes place over the course of one night, although we have both flashbacks into the past and we have glimpses into futures that might have been but never were in many cases, and we'll explain that later on as well. And the whole thing takes place, almost all of it takes place, within the confines of the cemetery, although we're told about events happening elsewhere, both in the White House, and in the Civil War and elsewhere. Now, the framing device of the novel is that we learn the story from two main sources. The first are the ghosts in the cemetery. And these are the ghosts of people, they're fictional. I'm pretty sure they're fictional, aren't they? He made these people up. The ghosts in the book, these are real characters who address the reader directly. And it's through them that we see Lincoln as he comes into the cemetery, holds his son, and then leaves. And they're probably 2/3 of the book.
Yeah, so those characters, particularly one called Bevins and Volland, and there's a Reverend, Everly Thomas, they act as cumulatively as a kind of narrator, sort of explaining, describing events. But it's hard to say that events are narrated. They're more like curated. They're more sort of put together through a sort of set of artifacts, almost, or, events, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so. And while each of the ghosts talks, we talked about unreliable narrators in the past in some of the books that we've covered.
Yeah.
These guys are about as unreliable as it's possible to be.
Yeah.
Partly because they themselves don't know what's going on, or they only partially understand. So the ghosts are one source of information. The other source, which is maybe 1/3 of the book, are excerpts from contemporary written accounts, so their books, their diaries, their letters, which describe Lincoln, his domestic life, and events at the White House over the period of the story. And in particular, these extracts cover the party that the Lincolns were hosting, the illness and death of Willie, and its aftermath. And some of them are also genuine historical sources, which just talk about the Civil War. There are first-hand accounts of the war and the appalling suffering it created. Many from ordinary soldiers in letters or memoirs. But we also hear from slaves, from women who've been abused and raped, and from a whole cast of other characters as well. So it's through these accounts, most of which I think are genuine, but some of which Saunders has invented, and you're never quite sure which is which. That we get the sort of the wider picture and the other themes of slavery and race, which Saunders does to a certain extent explore towards the end of the book.
I mean, one way of thinking, the entire cast, apart from Abraham Lincoln, are dead. They're speaking from the grave. Now, obviously, Abraham Lincoln is dead, but in the context in which the novel puts him, he's the only living character in the cemetery. And all the sources, because they're really speaking to us today, are the voices of dead people. So the only person who's speaking as a living person in the novel is Abraham Lincoln speaking amongst a chorus of the dead.
Yes, and I'm not sure we ever actually hear him directly. We hear at one point that the ghosts, and again we'll come on to this, it's described as they inhabit his body. And we then hear Lincoln's voice. And in the extract we read at the start, Charlie, the bits I was reading were Lincoln's voice. And I think we're asked to assume this is Lincoln talking, but it's filtered through the ghost.
Yeah.
So you're quite right. Everyone's dead apart from Lincoln in the book. That is a very important point. And each of these voices is quoted directly. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because if you haven't read the book, it's quite hard to understand. But the way it's written and presented on the page is quite an important part of the structure of the book.
Yeah.
There are a series of speeches. And they're quite short, 1 or 2 lines, 3, 4 lines, some of them. And underneath is the name of the person who's made the speech.
Like
and the entire book is basically like that. And if the person who's made the speech is a ghost, his or her name appears at the bottom of the speech after a space in lowercase and italicized letters. And that's how you know it's a ghost. If it is a historical attribution or a quote from a letter or a book, the attribution is given in the form that academics use when they're writing footnotes to books. So the book is quoted, the title of the book is quoted, then the name of the author. And if that book is repeated, he says something like op sit or something like that. So there's this sort of academic historical feel to the presentation as well.
Why do you think he puts those sources in, Ruth? Those historical or made up historical sources as well as the ghosts? Because do they add anything to the book?
Well, I think they certainly add something to the book. Whether the whole thing works is another question.
Yeah.
But no, I think they definitely add something to the book in that they are, or they purport to be, real accounts from alive people who experience something on Earth, rather than, the sort of slightly odd accounts we hear from the ghosts.
Right.
So when I read it, I felt it provided a sort of grounding and a reality, if you like, a sort of earthiness, which I think the book benefits from. but they're so scattered and diffuse. And actually some of the accounts, particularly from some of the individuals who suffered, are written in vernacular language, which again is quite hard to understand sometimes. So they're not always authoritative, but I think they contrast with the apparently supernatural ramblings of the ghosts. I think has an effect. But they're all unreliable. You're never quite sure what's true. So at the party at the White House is being described, some of the accounts say there's the most beautiful moon outside and it lit up the gardens. And then another account says there was no moon. It was dark. It was cloudy. So you're not quite sure, who to believe and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
What do you think, Charlie? Do you think it works?
I think I'm not so sure about that. It's interesting. He works in a university. I think there's something sort of slightly academic about the way the again, we don't get too heavily into this, but a lot of the ghosts' accounts have written features like italics, for instance, or the swearing is F asterisk asterisk asterisk, for example, which is not it's not a spoken feature. It's presented as a written text. And so there's a lot of sort of interplay going on about what's a real source and what really presents the part, which strikes me as a sort of a kind of university bubble concern rather than something normal readers might be that bothered about, really. I think the interest of the novel, for better for worse, is in the ghosts' voices. Yeah. And I agree. That's interesting about the earthiness of them, that they do root it.
Good. So the majority of the book is ghosts. So let's have a look at them. They are in the Bardo, as the title says, Lincoln in the Bardo. And the Bardo it's a Buddhist term. George Saunders is a Buddhist. He describes himself as a beginner Buddhist. And it means a place of transition between death and reincarnation normally, but it can also be from life to death. He used the word Bardo rather than something else like purgatory, because most people don't know what it is. Whereas if he'd used purgatory, they'd have a much more specific sense of what it might be. And he was brought up a Catholic, George Saunders, and purgatory, of course, is a permanent hell, really, isn't it? And a
well, it's a temple, to be fair. You're there for a few thousand years, to be sure, but I think you do ultimately get from.
But you can get out.
Yeah, everyone gets out of purgatory in the end.
Everyone gets out, okay.
Yeah.
Or either to heaven or hell.
No, always to heaven. Purgatory. From purgatory, you always go to heaven, but after all of your sin has been purged.
Okay.
I'm so pleased to have to teach you something real about the afterlife.
It's not that bad then.
Exactly.
But Bardo, so the Bardo depends on your state. So the Bardo it's more sort of transitionary. There's some versions where it's a hallucinogenic period, where whatever thought patterns and neuroses you had during your life get writ large. Anyway, this Bardo is the Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C.
In his short stories, Saunders' protagonists perish. They're liberated from their bodies. They float above the earth. And they're struck by epiphanies concerning the fragility of humanity and the beauty of their existence. So it's familiar territory for people who've read other texts by George Saunders.
Right. So various conditions apply to the ghosts while they're in the Bardo, in the cemetery. First of all, they cannot leave the physical confines of the cemetery.
It's a very small world, isn't it? So there's a fence, there's a gate, there's a chapel, there's this kind of slightly odd carapace, but the ghosts call it a community. It's quite a small world.
Yes, and sometimes they sort of think they can get out and they crash against the fence, don't they? And secondly, they can converse with each other, and they do all the time. They talk to each other. Thirdly, they are all confused about why they're there and what they can do about it. And with, as far as I can see, only one exception. They don't really understand that they're dead. They think that they're sort of in some kind of limbo. They understand that. And they call their coffins sick boxes, and their dead bodies are sick forms. They're intensely frustrated by their situation. They know they need to get somewhere else, but they don't know how to do it. Their memories are terrible. They keep repeating their stories. They are most definitely not reliable narrators. The world is kind of shrinking in on them.
Yeah, I mean, it's grotesque, isn't it? With the soul, the ghosts have monstrous forms, and the Reverend says they're tired of living in a state of constant fear. So it's not a happy place.
Yeah. They're all troubled by unresolved issues in their lives, or they feel guilt for something they've done wrong, but they find it very hard to articulate their feelings. And they're under the impression, wrongly, that they can get back to earth and in some way put right what's gone wrong. So there's a huge sense of frustration. They all have bizarre appearances, which are in some way manifestations of their mental and emotional states. So one of the main narrators who voiced the piece that we read at the beginning is called Hans Vollmann. For reasons we'll come to in a minute, he is hugely sexually frustrated, and he walks around naked and he has a huge erection.
Yeah, so the characters, their primary features are like the specific forms of their suffering. And it's like, Bevins has myriad eyes. I suppose it gives you a visceral idea of what their suffering feels like.
Yeah, exactly. They do move on.
Yeah.
Some of these, they all move on in the end, as you say, Charlie. And when they do, wherever it is they're going to go, to heaven, to hell, to nirvana, the remaining ghosts who witness the moving on of the ghost, they always describe the event using the same formula of words, which are as follows: a bone-chilling fire sound associated with the matter light blooming phenomenon, an experience I shall not even attempt to describe. So there is this sort of overwhelming thing that happens, which involves sound and light. And then the character disappears, and it's beyond their understanding, this event that happens when the ghosts move on. And how long do they stay there? Well, it depends. Many of the young children only stay a very short time. So at one point we're told the Evans twins departed this sorry vale together at 15 years, 18 months. So that's what was written on their gravestone. They tarried 9 minutes, then left at precisely the same instant, twins to the end. Percival Strout, aged 17 years, tarried 40 minutes. Sally Burgess, 12 years and dear to all, tarried 17 minutes. So very sort of specific. There's a sort of pedantic level of detail, and that's very much the atmosphere. That's very much the sort of tone of many of the ghosts, that they're sort of focused on really quite sort of minute things because they can't control the big things. They're a little bit pathetic and sometimes quite comic. And their situation is tragic, but they're sort of not tragic figures, are they? They form relationships which seem to be supportive and are based on their mutual frustrations. But it's sort of to compensate for their inability to do anything or understand anything. They converse all the time in this slightly long-winded, pompous prose, as if to sort of cover up the fact that they don't really know what's going on or what they're talking about.
It's very odd, isn't it, Rue? I mean, it
is odd.
Intentionally so, I must presume. And just what you described there, the contrast between Vollmann and Bevins, who are the first ghosts we meet, their upper class diction, which is highly lyrical, and the absurdity of their appearance. It's extremely strange.
Yeah, it is. So let's have a quick look at some of these, the main ghosts. So Hans Vollmann, we mentioned earlier. He was a printer. He got married at quite late in his life, at 46, to an 18-year-old girl. We're told that the marriage wasn't consummated, but they lived together happily. And after a period of time, she leaves a note on his desk saying that she wanted to, and I quote, expand the frontiers of our happiness together in that intimate way to which I am as yet a stranger. She requested that I guide her in this, as I had guided her in so many other aspects of adulthood. And that's very much a lot of it is that kind of tone. It's amusing. It's quite funny.
That's like a good chat up line, don't you think?
Yeah.
I'll try it on my wife. Expand
but again, there's a sort of slightly sort of sense of absurdity, because what happens next? The next day he's getting ready to sort of go and make love to his wife for the first time, but he's killed by a beam that falls from the ceiling in his office, and he tells us, this is the ghost speaking, I saw that our plan must be indefinitely delayed. What a frustration. Well, it seemed we must wait until my recovery was complete. So, he thinks he's ill, he's going to recover, but of course he can't. And that's very much the atmosphere you have with these ghosts, that they have this frustration and they can't resolve it. Volman is one of them. Another one is called Roger Bevins III. He's the other main narrator. He's a gay man. He falls in love with a young man called Gilbert, but Gilbert leaves him because he wants to, inverted commas, live correctly. So we're told that Bevins slit my wrists over a porcelain tub. Mm. And it's terrible because he feels guilty. He wants to experience love. He can't. Society won't let him. And what both these characters have in common is that their lives were unfulfilled and they feel they have unfinished business. They're frustrated, in this case, both sexually frustrated. Volman wanted to sleep with his wife and Bevins wanted to live with Gilbert, but they were unable to do it. And I think there is a message, part of it, there is a message in this book. A part of it is, don't have any regrets in life, get on with it and make the most of what you've got while you've got it. Leave it all out there on the pitch, as they say, Charlie.
So that's something I think they've failed to do, those two. But there's also with Bevins, there's a sense in which before he slits his wrist and he's about to die, and he has this real epiphany about the beauty of the world. And it's interesting because later, and I'm just going to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly read this. Lincoln has a very similar epiphany when Lincoln is thinking about how he's going to move forward given that Willie's died. He thinks the following: and the peach orchards and haystacks and young girls and ancient wild meadows drove him nearly mad with their beauty, and strange animals moved in lazy mobs along muddy rivers crossable only with the aid of some old rowing hermit. And so it goes on. In the midst of the Civil War, Lincoln's able to sort of identify with beauty in the middle of all of that. So I think there's something about seeing the beauty of the world.
That's a very lyrical vision of rural America in the 19th century, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The poetry, if that's the right word, lyrical, the lyrical writing, some of the poetry of the novel is exquisite.
It's very good. It is very good. And the third character, ghostly character, is called the Reverend Everly Thomas. He, I think, he's been a clergyman, I presume a sort of Anglican clergyman of some sort. And as far as we can tell, he's done the best he can. He's led a good life. And he is the one character in the book who does understand that he's dead. And in one long chapter, he explains, he says, "For I am different, yes. Unlike these, Bevins, Volman, the dozens of other naives I reside here among, I know very well what I am. I'm not sick. I'm not lying on a kitchen floor. I'm not being healed via a sick box. I'm not waiting to be revived. No, I knew very well what I was. I was dead."
Interestingly, though, in his kind of, I think the same passage goes on to, or a later passage goes on to describe how he's judged in a hall of kind of judgment, and he's rejected by a very strange deity indeed. Certainly nothing like what the Bible talks about.
Well, yes.
And George Saunders is, as you said, a Buddhist. And I think he is seeing Civil War bloodshed, George Saunders, as part of an impersonal occurrence rather than about personal blame and judgment. And Frances Hodge, who's a black woman at the end, says we must see God not as a him, some linear rewarding fellow, but an it, a great beast beyond our understanding. And the reason she's saying that is in the context of the violence of the Civil War, saying it is more blood that's needed because it's part of a kind of almost like a cosmic force of light and darkness and what have you, rather than about the kind of anguish and blame of individuals.
Yeah.
So I think Saunders is putting forward a kind of spiritual view of of how we should think about the Civil War, but a very different spiritual view to the standard American Christian one.
The other ghost we'll briefly talk about, who is obviously key to the plot, is the ghost of young Willie Lincoln. Yeah. And it's his arrival as a ghost in the cemetery which triggers the whole story. And Volman, Bevins, the Reverend Everly Thomas, they're very animated, very interested in his arrival. They understand he's someone special. They don't quite understand at this stage he's the son of the president. They meet him and they're kind of saying, what's going on? Are you leaving? Are you staying? And he says, I feel I am to wait. And he's on the roof of the mausoleum. And it's at this point we see Abraham coming into the cemetery. He enters the mausoleum, and the ghosts watch as he picks up the body of his dead son and holds it. This is the point where we're asked to consider whether there is a connection between the living and the dead, whether when Abraham picks up the son, he does get some sort of connection, because the ghost of Willie wants to connect with his father. He wants to say, it's all right, everything's going to be all right. But I'm not sure they do make a connection. And we get Abraham's words, we have loved each other well, dear Willie, but for now, for reasons we cannot understand, that bond has been broken. So I'm not sure there is a connection, and again, that's a sort of element of, it's tragic, really, that Lincoln has this sense of loss and he can't reconnect with the ghost who is right beside him and wants to.
There's also those main ghost characters. I think one of the characteristics of the novel is a series of brilliantly drawn vignettes of other ghosts. So there's the officer who conducted a massacre describing the beauty of the power of holding a rifle as he remembers the way he was abused as a child. There's the ugly woman who hates being stupid as she sits by the fire at parties, no one knowing her, despair as she's experienced a lifetime of loneliness. And these are like paragraphs or maybe a page, and it's like a description of a life as we hear their experience. And there's quite a lot of those, and I think they're beautiful, many of those.
Yeah, many of them are. So when the ghosts depart, the question is what happens next and where do they go? And in the case, as you said earlier, of one of them, the Reverend Everly Thomas, we get a glimpse of this, because after he dies, I won't go through the whole thing, but he and two other companions are taken to a place where they see a vision, and that there's a kind of entrance, and two people who may be angels of some sort or guardians of the entrance come up, and they say to each of these individuals, "How did you live?" And the other one said, and the second angel says, "Tell it truthfully." So that the character is required to account for their life, and based on whatever judgment is made, they get shown in one case a huge banquet with a sort of Christ-like figure and a magnificent table, and a great feast about to unfold. Another character, for no apparent reason, is shown a sort of vision of hell, very sort of Hieronymus Bosch-like scene. It's all a bit sort of sub-revelations, but it's also a bit sort of black. It's all blackly comic and a bit camp.
Very camp.
When the second figure is about to be shown hell, Christ says, "Oh dear." It's all very weird. But anyway, when it comes to the Reverend Everlett's turn, he gives an account of his life, which is honest, and he did his best. And yet he's about to be shown to hell, he thinks. And he panics and he runs away.
Good stride. It's great that you can run away from the last. I thought it was brilliant.
And ends up back in the cemetery.
Legged it.
And I'm just going to read a little bit of this, because I think it's quite important about what Saunders is trying to do with this book. He says, "For any of us here, it is too late for any alteration, of course. All is done. We are shades, immaterial. And since that judgment pertains to what we did or did not do in that previous material realm, correction is now forever beyond our means. Our work there is finished. We only await payment." So in other words, it's too late now.
Right.
And then he says, "I've thought long and hard on what might have caused me to merit that terrible punishment. I do not know. I did not kill, steal, abuse, deceive, was not an adulterer, always tried to be charitable and just. I believed in God and endeavored at all times, to the best of my ability, to live according to his will. And yet I was damned. Was it my occasional period of doubt? Was it that I sometimes lusted? Was it my pride when I had resisted my lust? Was it the timidity I showed by not following my lust? Was it that I wasted my life fulfilling outward forms? Was it some sin so far beyond my ability to comprehend it that even now I remain unaware of it, ready to commit it again? I do not know." That when I read that struck me as being so true. We're all sinners, aren't we? We all do bad things, but we also, most of us, try and do our best. And he's saying, what else could I have done? What else could I have done? How could I have lived a better life? Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I do. Those questions are raised. Now, I wonder. I don't know what you think, whether George Saunders is kind of rejecting that sense of judgment that's implied. So the Reverend Everly, from a biblical background, assumes that there's a kind of reckoning with the kind of scales, with the goodness and the badness being weighed up. And I wonder if if that's not really, that's missing the point. And the novel's clearly about death, about grieving, about letting go. But Bevins at the end, as is another of the narrators, it seemed every person was different. The reality is all suffer. We must try to see one another in this way. And Volman then says, as suffering, limited beings. So it's that sense that, I suppose it's similar to what you're saying. Everyone is limited, everyone suffers, but it's not about sin and judgment.
Yeah. So in contrast, Bevin's departure, so one of the main ghosts, when he departs and experiences the matter light blooming moment and all the rest of it, we get this passage where he sort of remembers many of the things that made life worth living. And Charlie, why don't you read this book? Because I think it's so beautiful, and it's very poetic. And this is Bevins, just as he's about to go to wherever it is he's going next.
Tying a shoe, tying a knot on a package, a mouth on yours, a hand on yours, the ending of the day, the beginning of the day, the feeling that there will always be a day ahead. Goodbye. I must now say goodbye to all of it. None of it was real. Nothing was real. Everything was real, inconceivably real, infinitely dear. These and all things started as nothing, latent within a vast energy broth, but then we named them and loved them, and in this way brought them forth, and now we must lose them. I send this out to you, dear friends, before I go, in this instantaneous thought burst from a place where time slows and then stops, and we may live forever in a single instant. Goodbye. Goodbye, good. And I don't know how to act, me fluttering off in a light blooming phenomenon.
And then he was gone. But that we've abbreviated that passage, but I think it's very, very beautiful.
Yeah.
We should talk a bit about Lincoln as a national figure in the Civil War. So Lincoln leaves the Bardo, he passes through, and he's temporarily inhabited. What happens? The ghosts inhabit his body. And when they're inside his body, they partly relay his feelings and thoughts. And from that, we learn that, agonized though he is by the death which has already occurred and the suffering that is to come, this is nationally in the Civil War, it sort of hardens him, and he becomes resolved to continue the war and give the people the freedom that they yearn for, particularly the slaves.
I mean, he's in his own... So obviously the Bardo is a transitional state for all the ghosts, but he's in his own state of transition. But what's different to him is he's the only one who has any agency.
And what agency, my God, to turn the course of history. Absolutely right. And through the book, through the various accounts, we see much more of Lincoln. We get a sense of where he came from. So in one of Bevin's speeches, we get a glimpse of him growing up, hiding from father to read Bunyan, raising rabbits to gain a few coins. And one of the characters who talks about him a lot is Thomas Havens, another ghost, who's a black man. And from Havens, we hear he was an opening book that had just been opened up somewhat wider by sorrow and by us. By all of us, black and white, who had so recently mass inhabited him. And then Havens sort of addresses him directly. He says, "We are ready, sir. We are angry, are capable. Our hopes are coiled up so tight as to be deadly or holy. Turn us loose, sir. Let us at it. Let us show what we can do." I wasn't quite sure about that. It was a slightly sort of clunky call to action from black people, but nonetheless moving. And then the last words in the book, we see Lincoln leaving the cemetery and riding back to the White House, and Havens seems to inhabit Lincoln and leave the cemetery with him and ride with him. And this must be sort of some sort of symbolic comment that Lincoln is taking the cause of racial equality.
He's got a black man's soul.
Yeah, exactly. A black man's soul inside him. So the last words of the book are, And then I roused myself and sat up straight and fully rejoined the gentleman being Lincoln, and we rode forward into the night, past the sleeping houses of our countrymen.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you. It's interesting, isn't it? It obviously it raises that question that the book's been exploring: is how far can the dead influence the living?
yeah,
And Lincoln walked forward with this black man's ghost
exactly.
inside him to change the world. Yeah, I find it sort of it's powerful. It's moving. It's kind of slightly contrived. I'm with you.
And then we get all these other ghosts. We won't go through them all now, but some of them are slaves. Some of them are women who've been sexually abused. They tell their stories in their own words. It is very powerful, but again, it's slightly had a feeling to me of being, a platform for where some of these issues were able to be explored rather than a sort of organic part of a artistic whole.
I thought that too. There's a bit of a shopping list of suitably woke or modern concerns represented by sort of archetypes. You know, there's the racist soldier, there's the paedophile, there's the gay man in a homophobic society, there's the abused woman, you know, the capitalist, the druggist, the honourable black slave. So it's the other thing is interesting is it's a really male world. You know, the three narrators are male. The Lincolns are male. We hear about Mrs. Lincoln only insofar as she's fallen to pieces, which I know is historically true, but it's oddly doesn't reach towards women in the same way.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know what a female reader experienced with that, I think.
So what's it about? I think, as we said, a lot of it is about this point in American history. It's about Lincoln. It's about his legacy. It's about the way he dealt with the Civil War and slavery. And Saunders stresses his humanity. I think this part is done really well. I must say, you get this sense of this almost uniquely great man who's able to deal with this appalling tragedy personally.
Yeah.
And he's able to place it in the context of the greater suffering of his country. And he's able to not embrace, but he's able to chart a course for the next 3 years, which he knows perfectly well will involve terrible suffering and huge amounts of death, because he feels that in the end, the alternative is worse, and that this is the only path to achieve the freedom of the abolition of slavery and a prosperous United States of America. So I think that's part of it, and I think that bit works really well. The other part of the book is about Saunders' interest in death, how we approach death, how we deal with it, what we think happens next. And I'm not saying it's easy to write about this stuff. It's not, because none of us know. And I think it's really interesting, some of the stuff he writes about. But ultimately, as you were saying, Charlie, I think there is an element of using it as a bit of a platform. I'm not convinced by the multitude of narrators and voices. Right. The sort of weird physical forms the ghosts all take are sort of partly bleakly comic. They're partly obscene. They're sort of quite random. The whole thing, it just feels a bit random to me, I think. Well,
it's interesting. I mean, but I've read it twice, and both times I had quite a similar experience, which is, I begin reading it, I just find it, really odd. I get completely immersed in the brilliance of it and the beauty of some of the writing, and I find a lot of the creation of individual people, not just voices but lives in small extracts, absolutely brilliant. And I found the whole Abraham Lincoln thing very moving. And so I've both times I've finished the book with a sort of feeling along the lines of, this is absolutely fantastic. But then I've stepped away from it, and you think about it, and you just come back to the fact it is just very odd. So I think there is something slightly disconnected about the different parts of it. And I hear you about there's a lot of ideas. It's a meditation on death, that whole Buddhist sort of theme. I forget what the phrase is in the Bevan's extract you asked me to read, but something about a broth. Something will all come from a broth. It feels like it feels like ideas are being foregrounded in a way that we are conscious of, which can I think in the text feel a little bit uncomfortable. But what I really liked about it was that the characters who've experienced horror in death are then able to experience beauty and a beautiful death. So for Bevins, the defining moment as he goes out in a kind of heightened experience of time is the beauty of the world he loves so much. And I do find that really, really exquisite. I've got to say.
Yeah.
So I really loved it. I thought it was excellent. But I think, ultimately it's not perfect. It's not. There's something not quite altogether pleasing about the whole.
So that so interesting. We picked these 4 Booker Prize winners quite randomly, really.
Yeah.
You do those ones and I'll do these ones, without really thinking about any possible connections they might have. But there are all sorts of odd connections between them. They're all historical novels, all 4 of them, of one sort or another. And 3 of them have ghosts in them, and 2 of them have a lot of ghosts in them. 2 of them are written from the same place, from this sort of from characters who are dead, surrounded by other characters who are dead. And in 7 Moons, Marley he seems to be able to affect what happens on what we think of as the real world, whereas these people can't in this book. But they're sort of looking at the same things, I think.
And does that reflect the spirit of the time? So the dead, hearing the voices of the past, anxieties perhaps about the present world we live in, a kind of a loss. We've been through all that long Enlightenment, forever lasting period where we've all lost our Christian faith, but people have a lot of, I think, questions about spirituality in today's world. So I think it's probably it feels like a coincidence that the 4 novels have such similar themes, high political focus, real interest in spiritual questions. But I bet that is a reflection, Rue, if it's not a horrible word to use in our podcast, of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Heaven help us all.
And the experimentalism of some of the forms as well. Experimentalism, the innovation.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think they're all properly original novels. So Wolf Hall, which is, as we explored, not my favorite, but it's definitely exploring a new type of historical fiction. The Milkman looks at the troubles which has been done to, if it's not an inappropriate word, to death, in a completely fresh way. That there's nothing kind of stale or generic about any of these texts, which is amazing. The novel's alive and flourishing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, they're all excellent. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
All worthy winners, I think.
Yes, I agree. Are we going to put them in order?
We're going to do, well, you put me on the spot there. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's coming up, because we should say to everyone that we're going to do a special episode next where we're going to introduce our system of ranking books. And everyone likes a list. Everyone who's male likes a list. Male middle-aged man like me likes a list. And we're going to basically score all these books out of 10. And Charlie has basically designed the system. In our next episode, we will introduce it and explain how we're going to do this. We might have a bit of debate. We'll see.
Yeah.
And we will place the books we've read so far on that list. And to confuse matters further, there are actually going to be 2 lists. And the first will be a sort of all-time, is it an all-time great book?
It's a great
list.
Yeah.
And what's that one called, Charlie?
It's called the Book in Greatness Scale. The big scale, if we're going to make an acronym out of it.
Book in Greatness. There you go. And then, because a book like this, if you're comparing it with, I don't know, Shakespeare or Ulysses or War and Peace, it will not score that highly.
No.
But nonetheless, we think this is a very good book. So we'll have a secondary scale, which is a kind of, review of what we felt about it. And a book like this will score much more highly on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we'll be talking about that in our next episode, and we'll have a look at the books we've read so far. And after that, we're going to do a couple of poetry episodes. We're going to do Sylvia Plath. Charlie, you're going to do Sylvia Plath, I think.
Can't wait.
And I will do Philip Larkin, great favourite of mine.
Also can't wait.
And after that, in December, in the run up to Christmas, we're going to have 4 Christmas specials, including inevitably A Christmas Carol by Dickens. We'll do some Christmas children's books, literature.
Yeah.
A bit more poetry, I think.
Yeah. Christmas poetry, really.
And then to add a bit of literary heft, John is going to do The Dead by James Joyce.
Well, I was going to do that just after Christmas, in the sort of the dead bit between Christmas and New Year.
The dead period.
When only the real hardcore listeners, who want to hear about The Dead by James Joyce. How appealing does that not sound? Can tune in, but I think we decided we're going to do in the week just before Christmas. We're going to do, and he's embarrassed, but I've forgotten the name of it. A Small Good Thing, A Few Small Things.
Yes.
Which is a lovely novel, which was a film, and that's set at Christmas time, and
recommended by Fred, our brilliant new producer.
Blame Fred if you don't agree with us on that one.
Who was young and in touch with the youth.
He knows about stuff. Yeah.
And then in the new year, we got a major series coming up on more great classic 19th century, early 20th century novels. So we'll tell you more about that nearer the time.
We're going to start the year with great expectations, not just our own, but of the novel as well.
Indeed. So there we go, everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you very shortly.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.